So greetings again. Thank you so much for joining us. We've been really happy with the turnout that we've had, the number of registrations for this event. Obviously, it's a topic that people are interested in, and they want to hear from Piper and me about Animal Outlook's legal advocacy. So, just a few housekeeping items first. As you probably heard from the notification, the session's being recorded and it will be available to everybody. It'll be on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. We'll also send out a recording to all the people, all the meeting participants who registered, so you can share it with friends or watch it later if you've got to step out for a second. And we'll be having a brief Q&A session at the end of the presentation, as I mentioned. So please do use the Q&A feature or just submit your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to your questions for either myself or for Piper a little later on. And just before we begin, I wanted to let you know that this giving season, our friends at Vegan Grants are matching every donation that we receive up to $100,000. Normally, as you probably know, if you've been around Animal Outlook for some time, this matching gift event starts on Giving Tuesday, but we've actually got permission to start the matching gift challenge tonight. So thank you very much, Vegan Grants. And that means that if you log on to animaloutlook.org/donate now, you'll be able to get your gift doubled right now. So that's twice the funds for some of the incredible legal work that Piper and I are about to speak about. So at any point during this webinar, feel free to head on over to animaloutlook.org/donate and get your tax deductible donation doubled. And lastly, I want to thank our sponsors for making tonight's event possible. Dr. Bronner's has been a supporter of Animal Outlook for many years, and we're so grateful. Their support has allowed us to provide these valuable opportunities to share insights and behind the scenes glimpses into the world of animal protection. So thank you so much to Dr. Bronner's and its team. I know you're all animal advocates just like us. We couldn't do this without you. So, right, that being said, housekeeping taken care of, let's get started. I'm thrilled to introduce someone whose legal brilliance and strategic vision are transforming how we challenge animal agriculture through the courts. A Harvard Law School grad, whose degree sits intimidatingly on the wall behind her in case any adversaries need a reminder of who they're up against. Piper Hoffman has just celebrated her fifth anniversary as Animal Outlook's Senior Director of Legal Advocacy, bringing over 25 years of litigation experience to our team. Previously an adjunct professor of animal law at NYU Law School, under Piper's leadership, Animal Outlook's legal program has become a powerful force for systemic change, defending crucial ballot measures like Proposition 12 and Massachusetts Question 3, and pioneering ambitious approaches in consumer deception and corporate accountability cases that challenge the misleading marketing practices of meat, dairy, and egg corporations. What makes Piper exceptional isn't just her record of results, it's her ability to understand and teach that litigation isn't just about winning cases, it's about compelling an industry that's been built on exploitation to finally bear the true costs of its practices. And whether that's coordinating pro bono partnerships that multiply our impact, or mentoring the next generation of animal law attorneys through our fellowship program, or pursuing bold cases with the potential to reshape entire industries, Piper brings a tactical precision and unwavering commitment to our mission. And I'm so grateful to have Piper on the team. Her work has helped shape the development of animal law in the United States, turning Animal Outlook's vision for a just food system into a courtroom reality. So please join me in welcoming Piper Hoffman. Piper, how are you?
I'm doing well, Ben. Thank you for that amazing introduction.
It's well deserved, Piper, well deserved. So, Piper, I guess a nice softball question to get started, and probably one that people would like to know. What does a day to day look like for an animal lawyer at Animal Outlook?
I usually start the day looking at some newsletters from the animal agriculture industry. It's good to know what they're thinking. Sometimes some things from the animal law movement as well. There's always meetings. Um, Sometimes I'm just meeting with my team in Animal Outlook. Last week, I had a video meeting with an activist who told me that she had a piece of evidence I very much wanted. It was a screenshot that proved that a company had pledged to go cage free way back when. They said they'd do it by 2025. They haven't. And the website where they made the pledge has been taken down. So she had the screenshot, which was fantastic. And while we had this conversation, she had a little blue parrot perched on the top of her head, which to me just felt like one of the perks of working in animal law. So back to the typical day, I might review a research memo from an intern about a potential new case and try to talk a pro bono attorney into taking on a new project for us. And then there are always emails to answer.
Yeah, yeah, always emails, and I'm glad not every meeting is boring and has blue parrots. I know certainly we appreciate the cat distractions here at Animal Outlook whenever there's an animal friend who joins. Um,
Absolutely.
so thinking about some of the strategy, because in your introduction I mentioned that part of what guides our philosophy when it comes to legal advocacy is getting a company to bear the true costs of its practices. What does that look like for you?
So if anyone isn't familiar with the concept of externalities, animals in companies in the animal agriculture industry increase their profits by externalizing their costs onto others, including the environment, taxpayers, their consumers, animals. And the costs that we're talking about are significant. There's an estimate that if the actual damage to the environment from producing beef was factored into its cost at the grocery store, shoppers would pay 5 times as much for beef as they pay now. So these are significant costs that we're talking about. And I mentioned they can be externalized onto animals too. And that usually looks like increased suffering. So a company may cram a bunch of animals together into one tiny barren cage rather than spend more money to make the animals more comfortable, give them something to do, improve the infrastructure. That's a method of externalizing costs. And sometimes these companies realize there are many consumers who don't want to buy products of animal cruelty. So sometimes these companies that are being entirely inhumane will make marketing claims that their product is humane. And then we can go after them. Consumer protection law, we can bring lawsuits against a company for deceiving consumers, making marketing claims that something is humane when it isn't. For example, we recently settled a case with an egg producer, Alderfer. It was a 6-figure settlement. They had to stop claiming that their eggs were free roaming, take that off the packaging. And as part of a class action settlement, 53,000 people who had bought Alderfer eggs made claims in the class action, which means that they were exposed to our claims against Alderfer of humane washing.
Yeah, I really love that case. It was one of the first cases that I got to work on right at the end when I came over to Animal Outlook. And what you did, a couple of things really excited me. One, it was the first time that we know of that we flew drones over the factory farm walls and viewed the claims, the free roaming hen claims, and viewed that the birds were just given a wire porch, a raised wire porch, hardly the type of free roaming that people would, when they come to read free roaming, that they would come to view it. But what you took it then a step further. You actually showed people the pictures of the birds in the free roaming facility and asked them, do you think this is free roaming? And so it was the customers of Alderfer, potential customers of Alderfer, and I think something like 80% of people said, no, I wouldn't consider that free roaming. And you used all of that as evidence in that case, which was eventually settled. Um, so that's a couple of firsts in that. How do you go about thinking what kind of tactics you're going to employ in a case like that? Did that come pretty obviously to you, that kind of thinking?
I want to say yes, but really it was the product of years of experience because I know that in these kinds of claims, there are two big potential difficulties of proof. One is you have to show, under most jurisdictions' laws, you have to show that the claim the company made deceived consumers or misled them, that they had a different interpretation of what it meant than the actual reality. So that is what made me think of a drone. Because if these birds were really free roaming, they'd be outside, they would be visible. And then the other piece, the piece that I'm sorry, I got that backwards. So that was the consumer survey. But whether the claim was true or not was the drone. So it was a result of just thinking through the case and how they'd been difficult before.
I got you. Yeah, thank you. It's still one of my favorite things I've worked on. So just as Warren put in the chat, just a reminder that if you want to have your question answered by Piper or myself, please do drop it into either the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll get to it a little later. And also, all of the cases that we described tonight are just handled by two attorneys, right, Piper? So another thing that you may not be aware of is that all of our legal actions are 100% funded by donations from supporters like you. So if you're able to support Animal Outlook with a gift tonight, again, that website address is animaloutlook.org/donate. And that's every gift that you give tonight and through the rest of the giving season will be doubled dollar for dollar. So thank you so much for your support. Piper, just want to come to another thing. So we've talked about consumer deception cases. What are the other kind of legal avenues that you have in your arsenal, or legal weapons that you have in your arsenal? Cases like strategic impact litigation that you kind of look to take on our huge nemesis of animal agriculture.
Well, first, I want to acknowledge that right now we are very fortunate to have a legal fellow for 1 year. So Sophie Carroll has joined us. She's a recent Stanford Law graduate. She's amazing. So for the time being, we have 3 lawyers, which is just a luxury. Other kinds of cases that we bring, a big part of our work is encouraging law enforcement. We conduct undercover investigations and collect so much evidence of animal cruelty. And every state in the country has a criminal law against animal cruelty. So sounds great. That should discourage cruelty. That should incentivize employees to treat animals well. The problem is it's very rarely enforced when it comes to animals in agriculture. So when we get this evidence from an investigation, we also put together a legal analysis of what laws were broken and what charges should be brought. We connect it up with the evidence for each claim, wrap it all up in a bow, and bring it to the prosecutor or the district attorney and say, you should bring these criminal charges. We've done all the work. It still can be hard to convince them. For instance, we did an investigation of Martin Farms, which is a dairy in Pennsylvania, and collected just horrible evidence of systematic cruelty. We went to the district attorney requesting 327 criminal charges of animal cruelty, and the DA refused. So Pennsylvania has this unusual law that allowed us to take the DA to court for refusing to bring charges. And in the appellate court of Pennsylvania, the Superior Court, we got a wonderful opinion where the judges said that the evidence that we had presented was more than enough to make out a prima facie case of animal cruelty. And the Superior Court directed the lower court to order the DA to bring charges. Unfortunately, the case was then appealed. It was reversed on other grounds, remanded, and we're still in litigation. But that was one example of a kind of legal advocacy that we use.
Do you have a favorite type of case, Piper? What are the things that get you going? There's the false claims, there's the law enforcement, there's the the bigger kind of moonshot cases, what are the things that you look forward to? Like, what would be your ideal case?
Any opportunity to nail the bad guys. I'm happy with all of them.
To give them a kicking.
It is fun to bring the moonshot cases where we try to change the law, actually make a change that will be systematic, that will apply to lots of animals and not just the animals at issue in that case. But those cases are few and far between. One of them is we just brought an appeal, we just completed an appeal in the Second Circuit of a decision upholding a new USDA rule that is significantly reducing regulation in pig slaughterhouses. So this is millions and millions of pigs every year affected by this law. And it's a big ask. It will be a big win if we can get it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. You've got to have a mix, right? I mean, there's unfortunately there are so many instances of the law failing animals that if we can bring pressure wherever we can, um, there are many opportunities to help animals. I just want to, we are getting some questions. Thank you so much. We're going to get to them in just a bit, and please do continue to leave your questions. Prop 12 has been something that has occupied a lot of your time since you've been here. Can you, firstly, you might have to explain what Proposition 12 is to a couple of people. I just want to kind of would like you, if you wouldn't mind, to describe the role that you and Animal Outlook have played in defending this flagship animal welfare law and why you think it's important for the movement, because it has been fairly controversial amongst the movement in general.
Sure. Prop 12, it's short for Proposition 12. It started as a ballot initiative in the state of California. So when it was passed, it was because voters voted for it directly. And what it does is prohibit three kinds of intensive confinement systems on farms: battery cages, gestation crates, and veal crates. It also goes a step further and prohibits selling the products of those confinement systems in California, even if the actual confinement happened in a different state. So that was a big win for the movement, and it was a big loss for industry, which reacted by just suing everybody. they brought three lawsuits against Prop 12, and the state of California was the defendant because it was a California law. We were concerned that the interests of animals might not be represented in the courtrooms. So Animal Outlook and several other organizations together moved to intervene as defendants, which we did in all three lawsuits. And we wound up winning all three lawsuits. One of them went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Animal Outlook in particular was able to provide a lot of the evidence of the cruelty of these confinement systems from our investigations. Now, unfortunately, there is a round two in this war. Two new lawsuits have been filed against Prop 12 in the last few months. And once again, we have moved to intervene as defendants. Prop 12 is a big deal because it can have effects across the country. It forces animal agribusiness to internalize costs in one of two ways. For example, if it's a hog grower who uses gestation crates, they can either choose to spend the money to replace those crates with more humane housing, group housing for pigs, or they can forego the market represented by the state of California. So there's an actual hit to the pocketbook for cruelty in that situation. Industry hasn't just attacked in the courts. You may have heard of the EATS Act. It's a federal bill that would essentially overturn Prop 12 and prohibit states from passing other laws like it in the future. Now, Prop 12 isn't perfect. Animal Outlook is a vegan organization. We understand that animals will continue to be exploited as long as people keep eating them. So we aren't content just to make things a little better. But while we work on abolishing animal agriculture, it does help if we can make things a little better for some farmed animals. And at the same time, force these companies to internalize those costs. And Prop 12 does that.
Yeah, thank you, Piper. That's very clear, and you're getting some support from the chat there as well. And we're getting some questions. Thank you so much. We're just gonna got a couple more questions for Piper. Piper, so how do you decide on how to bring a case, or sorry, why to bring a case? There are so many, as we talked about, so many case possibilities. And especially in light of Prop 12, when we're thinking about incrementalism versus the moonshot case, like what's your decision-making apparatus look like when you are deciding what case to bring?
Well, I'm going to turn that one back around on you, Ben. I look to you to help me decide which cases we're going to bring and which cases Animal Outlook can really throw its support behind. So what criteria do you use?
Yeah, I mean, so as a layperson, obviously our main goal is to help as many animals as possible. Um, but there are, I guess I see it as a couple of quick wins we can get that kind of galvanize momentum because the victories are very important. You mentioned Alderfer. We also had a victory of Harvey's Market earlier on in the year, a butcher, a 100-year-old butcher in DC, which was selling foie gras under a banner that said humanely raised. And together with our friends from Legal Impact for Chickens, we were able not only to get them to stop that kind of what we argued was false advertising because foie gras can never be humanely raised or humanely procured. But we got them to stop selling foie gras completely. But it was a small butcher shop in DC. But I think it's been really galvanizing for the movement. So we've now seen a ballot measure in DC to ban foie gras completely, and it got press. And people then talk about the ethics not just of foie gras, but the ethics of eating animals. So I think those victories are really important for animals, especially as a movement. We've experienced a couple of setbacks in the last, 5 years. I think in 2019, 2020, it looked like veganism was becoming mainstream. It was everywhere. It was in fast foods, all over. You could get Impossible Whoppers and beyond. And it's fair to say that that has plateaued a bit. So we need some victories as a movement. Um, Having said that, so I really want to get those victories. I want to go for those small wins, the low-hanging fruit. Having said that, our adversary is just so big, and there's a long way to go that we're not going to do it just at a kind of a piecemeal rate. We do need those moonshot cases, as you were mentioning. We do need to take on the US government when it comes to deregulating the meat industry. We need to go after the line speeds getting faster and faster. We need to go after the big players because, yeah, it's going to take too long if we just go after the low-hanging fruit. So I think it's a combination of things. I think we need the victories to build on and gain momentum for the movement as a whole. But we need to take some risks. We need to take those big, expensive cases that are going to take many years to get our moonshot that's going to get us that tipping point. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Um, it also raises another question for me. You mentioned you're not a lawyer. So now that you've been at Animal Outlook for a year, I'm wondering if there's anything that surprised you about animal law or made you change your thinking about how to approach legal advocacy as a result of coming in. You took over from an executive director who is a lawyer and who helped build this whole program. What struck you?
Yeah, yeah, good question. And very big boots to fill in Cheryl Leahy, and I could never do it when it comes to what she's built through her legal advocacy. Um, I think you mentioned it earlier. Just sometimes we can put a bow on cases and have 300 criminal cruelty counts and have researched the law so well, and then you turn it over to authorities and they could just go, no thanks. That's been surprising. Like I knew the odds were stacked against us, but I didn't realize how random and how uh, just cherry picking, how much cherry picking there can be about what cases the sheriffs decide to investigate or the district attorneys decide to file. And we know animals are down the list of law enforcement's priorities pretty much because animals don't vote. And so we have to, as a
Or
movement,
donate.
or donate exactly to political campaigns. So we have to, as a movement, show how important it is for animals to be represented and pushed up the order. So you asked me what I've pivoted. I've tried to this year use our amazing support base. Animal has 30 years of supporters and all the people on this call, names that I recognize, who are always the first to jump on, Jan Stevenson, and Bonnie, people who really want to help animals to pressure law enforcement. Because I think sometimes people can be embarrassed into doing the right thing. And they can be guilted into, and they can be public shamed. These are public servants who are just not serving animals. So we can push them like we have Foster Farms was an investigation that in my first week we launched Foster Farms when we showed birds being run over by forklifts and being roughly thrown and kicked and um, you know terrible evidence of cruelty in video footage, and no prosecutions have been brought yet. But so we're pushing through our support base, we're pushing the DA and the Fresno sheriff to actually do something about that. And that's a tactic that I want to keep applying because if they're not going to do it based on the weight of the evidence, then they can do it based on public pressure. And as a voting bloc, we can decide to if they're not going to do something about it to elect people who are. So I think that's kind of one of the big things that I've been surprised by.
I remember when we were trying to get law enforcement to actually bring charges for this investigation, and we're somewhat used to not getting the answer that we want from law enforcement. You were outraged. You were like, I hate being ignored. And you just went after them. It was wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. If there's one thing I hate is yeah, it's being ignored. And I don't think we have to put up with it. I don't think we have to, it will only get us so far. At the end of the day, we'll have to accept that these people are the ones with decision-making power. But I think we can push things as far as they can go, and knock on every door that we can. We've recently as you know, we discovered that Wild Fork Foods was selling foie gras. It's a wholly JBS owned subsidiary selling foie gras across all 11 of its Southern California stores. And we sent it out to the city attorneys, we sent it to the district attorneys, we sent it to the US Attorney General. There are a lot of doors, and then I myself, I've visited 5 different police stations to try to get any of the local authorities to take issue with it. So, we think we're onto some kind of possibility there, but that might be another area where, we've got to go right to the top, to the Attorney General of California to actually get something like this to happen. But yeah, I'm not going to be exhausted or weighed down by the potential. I think it's one of those moonshots that we were talking about. I think you've just got to put everything out there to get justice for these animals because um, if you don't, who will? Um, Great. Well, Piper, I've been loving this discussion. I think we're probably ready to take some audience because we're about the halfway mark. So I just want to go to the first one that we got, which I like the look of. Bob Taylor very early on in the Q&A asked, what can we do to get pigs back to pastures and out of factory farms? And Bob, Piper, I wonder if there's like a what legal remedies, since it's a legal advocacy question or webinar, what can we do to yeah, get pigs out onto pastures and out of factory farms?
Well, as I noted, Animal Outlook is an abolitionist organization. So we don't want pigs being farmed wherever they are. Um, but one way to tackle these CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations that are sometimes called factory farms, they wreak so much environmental damage. And lately, I've been looking at the Clean Water Act and water regulations and finding that often these places are violating those laws and people can take them to court for that. So, one thing you might try is contacting your local Water Keepers Alliance and learning about how to test water and see if there are violations going on near you. Um, Obviously, go vegan. Um, and from a legal perspective, I think joining us in seeking law enforcement when there is animal cruelty against farmed animals is really important because we're helping to educate the government, the law enforcement who think of animal cruelty laws as being for cats and dogs. And we are raising awareness by showing them the video and proving to them that what they're seeing does break the law. And like Ben said, sometimes maybe they just need to be embarrassed. So the more pressure we can get on them, the better.
Thanks, Piper. And I just want to come back to this go vegan point because I think it's interesting. I think it seems to me that the majority of cases around animal law are involved in the welfare of farmed animals. Are there any opportunities to bring abolitionist cases? And if so, how do we do that?
That's a big question. Um, it's the focus is on the animal agriculture industry. It is very challenging to find a lawsuit, a viable lawsuit that is 100% animal rights and not welfare. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is there just aren't that many laws that protect animals, that are meant to protect animals. So if you bring a lawsuit, you're saying that some law was broken. If there's no law to be broken, you can't bring a lawsuit. Another reason is what's called standing. When you're in court, the judges want to make sure that they are not uh, trespassing into the realm of the executive or the legislature. So they don't want some random person to come into their courtroom and say, make up a rule about XYZ. The way that they manage to cabin their power and their authority is by limiting the courtroom to people who have a personal stake in the lawsuit. And animals don't get standing. People don't have a personal stake in not being in a factory farm. And so we're kind of stuck. So because of those two things, we wind up doing a lot of litigation that's more welfarist. And it's like I said with Prop 12, if we can force the industry to internalize more of those externalized costs, we can reduce their profits, potentially make these products more expensive, reduce consumption of animal products, create opportunities for plant-based proteins to compete better in the market. Um, all of those things help towards the ultimate goal. So we use the tools that we have along with others in the movement who are using the tools that we have in the legislature and the tools that we have with public outreach. And all of them together are going to get us where we need to go.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And just on Prop 12. We had a question from Katia, who's our wonderful Bay Area chapter leader. Thank you, Katia. Talking about enforcement of Prop 12. So I know you're still, and Animal Outlook is still focused on actually defending Prop 12 as it continues to be challenged in the courts. But why is there such a big problem with enforcing Prop 12 in California? There's a significant number of facilities, says Katia, that don't follow it. Is this just a case of you know, I know in the case of foie gras with Wild Fork Foods, we've actually had a problem just finding any agency to take responsibility for the enforcement of the foie gras ban, which has been around since I think it passed in 2008 and finally got up through the court system in 2019. What's the deal with enforcement of Prop 12?
Well, first of all, Katya, send me a list. I'm not even kidding. Uh, that's number one. Number two, enforcement is going to be a problem. It's a lot like with Wild Fork Foods, which was selling foie gras. That's not something that the cops are going to get super animated about. You tell them this is happening, and they'll say that's not really our department. Whose department is it to make sure the birds are not in battery cages? And that structural problem, it's a result of our society not seeing farmed animals as having any interests that need protecting, and then also making a decision not to protect whatever interests there are. Um, it's it's all so fraught. But one way that we can tackle that is, first of all, let us know what's going on. When we do investigations, we can get the word out as well as pressure law enforcement. And there may also be a need to go a more legislative route if Prop 12 is not actually doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. We had a question which is kind of similar to this about whether from Hoover, I should say, do we try to change and rewrite laws, or do we just take corporations or government entities to court? And it comes back to something that you mentioned to me previously about the reason laws exist. Well, laws need to be enforced, and we kind of see ourselves as the enforcer. Is that right? Is that kind of how you see yourself as an animal rights lawyer?
I see myself as facilitating and encouraging enforcement because most of the time we can't do it directly.
Yeah, and we can only do so much. I mean, there are great organizations working on creating new law, but I think yeah, getting those laws in force, someone's got to do that part of it, and it can be a bit painstaking as we've talked about. But what's the point in having laws if they're not going to be enforced? And I kind of like that. The Animal Outlook is there to make sure that people are held to account under the law and the very few protections that farmed animals have under the law. And it's another question here about, do you ever see there being a change that federal law would include protections for farmed animals like the Animal Welfare Act? Is that ever going to happen in our lifetime?
Oh, in our lifetime? Oh, that's harder. Um, I think it is going to happen. And I think it's going to be better than the Animal Welfare Act. The Animal Welfare Act does not have a private right of action. And what that means is that private parties who learn about violations of the Animal Welfare Act can take the violator to court. We can't do that under the Animal Welfare Act. If we were to get a law, my wish to protect farmed animals, my wish list would include that it would have a private right of action so that Animal Outlook could directly enforce that law. It would make a huge difference. I think that the Animal Welfare Act is due for an overhaul, and there's no reason that it couldn't apply to farmed animals, except that a whole lot of politics happened and they decided not to apply it to farmed animals. So yeah, I'd say the odds are good. Of course, I'm not one of the people doing the lobbying, but as a litigator, as I said, I rely on having those laws. that I can take people to court for breaking. So I'm optimistic.
Piper, we've had a question from someone, Sonny Pollard, who I suppose is in Miami, and this can apply for any situation where someone's outraged at what's happening locally. So Sonny says in Miami there's a slaughterhouse shelter called Miami-Dade Animal Services, and I've spent the last year looking for a animal or canine lawyer with no luck. They violated statute 828.12. Abuse, cruelty, and neglect is violated every day. We networkers need help. Called the Miami Sheriff's Office and they were no help, as we've kind of been talking about, as well as the health department. Also contacted Commissioner Simpson, FDACS, who didn't want to deal with the problems. What kind of advice do you have for someone who's like taking these kind of things on locally? You know, we do it nationally, we do it locally as well. What kind of avenues would you say for Sunny there are available?
Two things come to mind. One is talk to your legislator, whoever your local representative is, in whether it's state level or county level. The smaller it is, the more likely they are to listen to you and to actually take some action. The other thing I would recommend is to go to the local bar association, because a lot of bar associations, it's the professional organization for local lawyers, and a lot of bar associations have animal law committees, which is a group of people who are just as mad as you and want to do something about it. I would also, third thing, you're not alone. People are having these exact kind of problems across the country. I hear about them all the time. Every single one is heartbreaking and infuriating. And I'm so sorry you're having to deal with that, but you're not alone.
Thanks, Piper. Do we, Bob's asked a question. I'm not sure if you know this, and if you do, you should have told me before. Are there any billionaires who are interested in animal welfare, and how do we get them to contribute to the cause? I guess I want to pivot this. What kind of people do you see as being the most interested in animal law as a medium? I mean, obviously, practicing lawyers are mostly interested in animal law, but is animal law something that's kind of generally thought of as important within the movement as a whole? Where does it kind of stand in terms of investigations and outreach and that kind of thing? What kind of how do we drum up interest in that?
Um, in the movement as a whole, it feels like it can be seen as a little niche. Uh, Not everybody understands it or can do it, and litigation in particular can take years. So it can be a little harder to see the benefits. Um, but I think that it is absolutely crucial. There is no social justice movement in this country that has succeeded that hasn't included legal advocacy as a part of the strategy. You've probably heard of Brown versus Board of Education, which was a Supreme Court case ending school segregation. There was Loving versus Virginia about interracial marriage. More recently, Obergefell versus Hodges about marriage equality. You need those kinds of cases to both change the law and help change people's attitudes about these social issues. And we need a day in court like that too.
Thanks, Piper. Um, Larry has a question, somewhat topical at the moment, for I think relating to Zoe Rosenberg's case. Does Animal Outlook ever help defend activists in criminal court who have been arrested for rescuing sick animals from factory farms? If so, do you have any suggestions as to defense strategies in criminal case involving trespass? I guess I want to broaden this out a bit because Animal Outlook didn't work directly on that case, but Do you have any thoughts about Zoe Rosenberg's case? I know Animal Outlook started back when it was COK was very involved in starting kind of direct rescue, and then we pivoted our tactics slightly to focus on our investigations and legal obtaining of information and evidence. But what do you make about the kind of from a legal point of view, the right to rescue cases?
Well, I would say that at Animal Outlook, first of all, protecting our investigators is something we take very seriously. And as you mentioned, um, we did open rescues, and the prosecutors were overzealous, shall we say, in response, which is why the organization pivoted to undercover employment-based investigation. And the way that we protect investigators from those investigations is by abiding by the law so that there are no legal violations that they can be held liable for. So that's a different strategy. Um, the right to rescue cases are fascinating legally and from a movement perspective, but haven't been relevant to our work because we do abide by the law. And yeah, I think that is where I'll leave it.
I think you've talked to me before about wanting to be on offense rather than defense. So there's something tactically about you want to be the one to sue companies rather than defending ourselves against attack. I think is there a legal strategy behind that, or it's just so much more enjoyable and you think we'll get further by playing offense rather than defense?
I think that might just be a personal preference. I think being on offense is harder because if you're on offense, you have to figure out what are you doing even? What is the violation? Who's the plaintiff? Where are you bringing the case? What are you asking for? If you're the defendant, all you have to do is show up and say no. What they said, no. It seems a little less challenging, but I have not been on the defense side, so I probably shouldn't throw stones. In terms of which can be more effective and more powerful, when you are the plaintiff, you are in a better position to set strategy because of what I said. You're deciding what the issues are going to be, you're deciding what the evidence will be, and you get to choose when you're going to attack and when you're going to sit it out. So those are all reasons that I prefer being the plaintiff.
Great. Thanks, Piper. Probably got time for a couple more questions. I'd like to make sure we finish on the hour. And again, just a reminder, if you haven't already and if you're able to, animaloutlook.org/donate to support all of the work that Piper and I are talking about and to support our team of three animal legal lawyers for the next year at least. Um, so I want to make sure I get to this question from Elliot, who's asking if we can kindly talk about the status of animals as persons law. So, obviously you'll be aware of Non-Human Rights Project and everything behind that. And a few countries and states have established animals as geographical features and persons and thus entitled to human rights. Are there states in the US where that could happen? And then broadly, kind of what's your interpretation of the work to classify animals as persons under the law?
I think it's fundamental. It is crucial. The For those who aren't familiar, under American law, there are essentially two categories that are regulated by laws. One is persons, humans generally. The other is things, property. And if you're property, you don't have any interests that the law has to recognize. And so that one illustration of it is custody cases. In custody cases, the law is different in every state, but generally speaking, the judge will put a top priority on protecting the interests of the children of a couple. Um, Even though the children are not the ones who are bringing the lawsuit or defending against the lawsuit, they're just kind of there and they're stuck in it. And so their interests matter and are protected because they're persons. If you have the same kind of, say, divorce situation and you have a dog, there's wide variation in how the courts will handle that. But for the most part, they will say dogs are property. So maybe whoever bought the dog first keeps the dog, or whoever keeps the dog reimburses the other person for the market value of the dog, which at that point might be $10. Those are the cases where you really see the difference between being property and being a person. And the Non-Human Rights Project and others, their priority is on punching a hole in the wall between humans as persons and animals as property. That would make my life so much easier. For one thing, persons can have standing, persons can have interests that are protected. It goes on and on. So I am a big fan of that approach and that kind of work. And its importance to legal doctrine is it's fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Piper, probably a couple more questions. I'm going to take two questions as one because they're both about non-farmed animals. So, do we work with or help cases like Cody Roberts' case in Wyoming, the wolf abuse case, and then do we work with on the horse slaughter pipeline and slaughter of equines in America? Obviously, Animal Outlook is focused on farmed animals, and there's a lot to do just on the case of farmed animals, but where do you feel, how do you, why did you decide to work on farmed animals as opposed to being an animal lawyer who could practice, in any kind of animal law practice?
Probably when I realized that the number of animals who are killed for food every year in this country is around 10 billion. That's just land animals, that's not aquatic animals. 10 billion a year. I can't comprehend what that means, but it's a lot more than all the other animals put together. So, my own personal story, I came into this movement because of my cat, which is, not unusual. And that will always be near to my heart. Just in terms of quantity of suffering, number of individuals suffering, though, farmed animals is far and away the biggest crisis. So that was my thinking. And once I started working on these issues, I realized that factory farming is just playing a key role in so many catastrophes that we're dealing with at the moment, from deforestation, uh, global warming, water pollution, suffering of animals, human health problems. It, it's it's mind-boggling how much they are hurting everybody and everything on the planet. So I came for all the animals, and I'm staying for everything.
Great. I mean, if we didn't have 5 minutes, I'd think that's a great rallying cry to leave it on. But I do want to slip in one last question, which Bob again is asking about ag-gag laws. Um, obviously we do investigations. That's, I think, primarily what people know us for, and ag-gag laws are going to have an impact on that. What's the landscape like for the ability? I mean, you talked about protecting our investigators. What's the landscape like for doing um, for ag laws and for doing investigations at the moment, and where do you see that going?
We have fought laws that seek to impede investigations, including ag-gag. We have been involved in opposing those laws. More recently, we filed an amicus brief in a case challenging an Oregon state law that would require an investigator to notify everyone in a conversation that they were going to record it before they start recording it, which is not very stealth. So we opposed that. We filed an amicus brief in another case that would make the potential legal liability of conducting an investigation just financially astronomical. And when we're involved in those kinds of cases, we're protecting our right to investigate. We're also protecting the rights of journalists to go undercover. These are our basic First Amendment issues about whether the public gets to know what's actually happening around things that matter to us a lot, like the food we put in our mouths. So we are very involved in trying to keep the legal pathway clear to permit undercover investigations.
Yeah, thank you. I can speak. I suppose that's another thing that has surprised me about being at Animal Outlook, just how much diligence goes into making sure that our investigators are protected, that the risks are assessed properly, so that we can, go on and do the important work, which is already hard enough without the threat of legal ramifications. I just want to get a couple of shout outs in. Jan, thank you so much for your donation. Also, Cheryl Ruggiero has donated. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Denise Carroll, thank you, Denise, and Andrea Suarez and Joseph D'Angelo. Thank you so much all for your donations. Again, all your donations are being matched dollar for dollar tonight and will continue to be matched throughout the giving period for the rest of this year. Piper, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything that you would like to add? And in particular, I would like to know kind of what your outlook is for the legal landscape over the next few years. And generally, are you optimistic about the state of animal law? Is this an area for growth, or is this an area where we're going to increasingly be on defense?
I am optimistic. Um, when I was in law school, they didn't even offer animal law as a class. And now something like 3/4 of American law schools are teaching animal law. There were not bar association animal law committees, and now there are. There's been so much progress in animal law and in really in the animal advocacy movement in general. When I became vegetarian in the 80s, I didn't know any vegetarians. When I became vegan, servers in restaurants would say things to me like, "Oh, you can have the fish, it's okay." So we have come so far, and I am optimistic that we are going to continue making that kind of progress in animal law and on behalf of animals generally.
Me too. Yeah, I always say you got to be optimistic, otherwise you won't be able to advance these things through at the pace they need to. Okay, well, we're at time. Thank you so much. We've had a brilliant reception. Everyone pretty much stayed on the line throughout. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your generous donations. We really appreciate it. Thanks for these great questions for Piper. Super range of questions. And thank you for just being interested in Animal Outlook's legal work. We really can't do it again. We can't do it without you. We're looking forward to doing this again with you. I love hosting these town halls and allowing all our supporters to kind of hear directly from the team. And thank you for all your praise that's coming through in the chat now. We're really motivated by your support and couldn't do this without you. So thank you all so much. Okay, Piper, great to see you. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Too.
lovely
Thank you so
evening.
much.
Take care.
Bye.